Welcome to WYCD Wicked. That stands for What You Can Do. It's your old pal Jake, and I got the Coke bottles on today because we have a bunch of things to present to you, and I'm looking forward to it. Happy Friday! My word, we made it through another week. Country still standing. You love to see it. I would like to say, I'm going to try something fun. If we can get to 10 likes on this stream, I will play the True North Eager Beaver podcast interview, wherein we asked them for the worst of the worst politicians in the U.S. and Canada. We were going to either premiere that tonight or tomorrow. And if we get to 10 likes on this live stream, we will play that. So like the stream if you're enjoying it. If you want to see that interview, I'm going to hold it hostage for about 12 hours. Other than that, Bo of the Fifth Column talks about why there are no left-wing major political parties in the United States. Democrats don't count. Democrats are very much a center-right party when looking at that on the world stage. Ari Melber talking about indictments coming in Georgia. A January 6th investigator gave a pretty good amount of insight into the differences between the J6 investigation and what the DOJ, the J6 committee investigation and what the DOJ has done. And delighted to see it lines up with what your old pal Jake has been saying, which is who these people chose to focus on investigating. CNN and MSNBC talking about how Russia has already lost the war in Ukraine that they started. And what that could mean going forward. Also, very, very interesting chiming in from Leon Panetta. I cannot believe I'm agreeing with this man on something, but I sure am. He says, yeah, everything should be on the table for Ukraine, including giving them fighters, a.k.a. what we've been saying from the start. Give them everything they need to make this war fast and bad for Russia. And then, of course, if we can get to 10 likes, just 10 likes on the live stream, we are going to do the True North Eager Beaver podcast, Worst of the Worst, Politicians in U.S. and Canada of history and present day. Well, let's have a look at this here. I want to get started with this Bo of the Fifth Column. Do a proper intro. So Bo of the Fifth Column recently took a viewer question, and it was regarding why there is no truly left-wing parties in the United States. I think his answer is incredibly enlightening. Let's have a look at it. First up.
Well, howdy there, Internet people. It's Bo again. So today we are going to talk about the United States, the political landscape, political parties, and third parties, and the left and the right, and windows, and all kinds of things. Because we got a question from Germany, and on some level it's amusing, but I feel like there are probably a lot of people in Europe who have the same doubts when they hear an American commentator say, we don't have a left-wing party in the United States. And it prompted some interesting questions. So, I live in Germany and have heard you and others say the U.S. does not have a leftist party. With a friend, I looked at the political positions of your two main parties, and then at the others. Why doesn't the U.S. have an effective leftist party? There seems to be support for left ideas, judging by commentary online. Yeah, and all that makes sense. Okay. So, the reason the U.S. doesn't historically have a left-wing party is the Cold War. If you are my age or older, left-leaning ideologies, they were propagandized against a lot during the Cold War. I mean,
I used to make jokes where I would, like, amongst my pals, where anytime somebody did anything I slightly disagreed with, I would call them a commie. So, like, if we were trading candy, and I was like at Halloween, and this is me as like a kid. If we were trading candy and I offered up a payday in exchange for a Snickers, and they said I will only take 2 paydays for a Snickers, I'd be like, ah, you damn commie. All right, well, here's 2 payday. The fact that a kid that didn't really know anything about politics was making that joke tells you how pervasive this is that he was talking about. Some of you may remember. I mean, anything that involved critical thinking and the government was just stomped on. And of course, people who were who would argue that they were on the left but didn't really push for anything leftist didn't stand up and ever debate these folks. It was maddening.
they became insults. They became bad words, groups of people that were coming to get you type of thing. Now, times are changing, and the demographics that grew up without that propaganda, without that indoctrination, they're now voting age. And you're starting to see more people be accepting of left-leaning ideas. Now, we have the 2 main parties in the U.S. You have the Democratic Party, which is really, by your definition, center-right. Maybe just centrist, depending on what country in Europe you're in. And then you have the Republican Party, which not too long ago, it would have been your conservative party. Today, it's your extreme right party. We have third parties that exist, parties outside of those. Their main issue is that they're outside the Overton window. Every country has a range of acceptable political thought. And for the most part, the range that is established is center to center right. That's the U.S.
I might argue that being outside the Overton window, let me give him a dignified pausing spot there. Being outside the Overton window might not be the biggest problem with third parties. The biggest problem with third parties, in my opinion, is that their strategies are based around going for the gold. I think if you're going to run an effective third party, and by the way, I'm not advocating for that. I'll go into what I think we should do as leftists, theoretically, going forward. But if you are going to run in a third party, I think the worst way to go about it is to try to be a somebody from, let's just be realistic and say from the Democrats. Somebody from the Democrats who was a Democrat through small office, through very local offices, and then tries to jump to third party and run as a, let's say, a senator or for the governor or something, insanely difficult to get already. I think the problem with that is that you then have all the baggage of the party you came from, and you will be viewed negatively by people who might otherwise have voted for you for that from that party. And then you also have the lack of funding that comes with going against them, because now they're going to hit you too. I think the problem is one of strategy, largely. Yes, there is the issue of the Overton window, but that's a chicken or egg situation. Is the Overton window where it is because we have been locked into these parties? Good news is, with the pure existence of the activated American voting populace that has happened since 2015, primaries are much more active, which means we are having the parties expand the Overton window in good ways and bad. But my suggestion would be, rather than to, if we're talking strategically, rather than to focus on moving the Overton window, which should be something we're doing. I'm not saying we shouldn't put effort into that. But as an electoral strategy, rather than focus on that, start small. Start going for local offices running as a third party, because you can physically go to the constituents in your area and make your pitch. And I also think you should take full advantage of the fact that you are third party. You could even just call yourself independent. That might be more beneficial, to call yourself independent when in reality being part of a network of people that are functionally a third party, a voting bloc, let's say, within your state or within the country. But be independent, go from house to house, and make appeals across the aisle. If you get deep enough into this, you will realize there are issues indeed that you can reach across the aisle for. And you can even say, look, I'm a lefty, but I'm asking you, a right-leaning person, for your vote, because on these local issues, we are in largely, we are in agreement. Now, here's what I intend to do. You tell me what you think about it. I think that's the direction to go, yet I'd like to hear out the rest of what he has to say.
That is established is center to center right. That's the U.S. Over the last few years, the far right has gained traction, and they have been capable of actually getting electoral success on some of it for a little bit. The left-leaning ideas are gaining traction too, but that hasn't converted into a lot of electoral success yet. The third parties that exist, they're too far outside of that to gain any ground. And they tend to not put a lot of effort into local races, which they're not races that get headlines. They're not what people think.
Okay, I should have been patient with Bo.
Really have the power, but they do. And it helps build a structure, a party that could actually run somebody successfully on the national scene. Instead, most try to run candidates for key positions, like president. And when they do it, you also end up with a habit of choosing a voice from within that third party that's kind of extreme, that is at least on the extreme side of that party. So not just is the party platform outside of the Overton window of the United States, the candidates that they're putting up on the national scene tend to be even further outside of the normal accepted range of political view. That's why they don't really succeed. Those reasons. Not building the ground game at the local level, running candidates that are even further outside of the Overton window, and then the party platforms themselves are outside of the acceptable range of thought. Now, as far as commentary online, yeah, it's changing. It's changing. But you run into another issue. Like, I would suggest that a party built around social democracy, which is, that's left by U.S. standards. It's not actually leftist. It's still capitalism, but it's acknowledging that there's major problems with capitalism and dressing it up and all of that stuff. I would imagine that would be a successful platform.
From time to time, we get folks on this channel that are watching from other countries, which, by the way, I'm just tickled by. I love it. And I find that invaluable. Help me out here if you are listening from another country. How common is talk of social democracy? I realize there are a lot of social democratic parties. I'm not sure how to even phrase that, because look at the country I'm talking to you from. But how often is it talked about as a governing principle where you're from? Let me know in the comments.
Maybe as soon as 2028. That could be something that could win. The issue that remains is, I don't know if you see it from Europe, but the U.S., it is in a fight for its life against far-right authoritarianism. And until that's defeated, even people who might go for a social democrat, they're going to vote for the Democratic Party.
True, and I would say that is further a further argument for focusing on smaller scale elections. I don't even think that necessarily a third party is what is necessary. I don't even think that a third party is what is necessary in the United States to start fixing things. I think a third party is inevitable. And if you've listened to me before, you'll be familiar with the fact that I think we are going to stick with technically a two-party system, but those parties are going to change. I think the new conservatives are very much going to be the Democrats. And that will be followed. Interesting little fact, in other countries, in fact, basically throughout the world, when they color code parties to talk about conservative or liberal, or rather left leaning and right leaning, they use the opposite color schemes. Red means lefty everywhere else. Blue means conservative. I just think it's funny how that works out, because it seems inevitable to me that we are going to have Democrats representing conservatives in the future, because I don't think MAGA is going to stop doing what it's doing. I don't think Republicans are going to be able to get them under control. And I think people pay attention now to numbers, to studies, to et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are all things that the left benefits from. Having an educated populace, having an engaged populace, that benefits the left because the left actually gives a damn. So I think it's inevitable that the GOP is going down, and it's just a matter of how much they damage us along the way, assuming they don't succeed in actually, overthrowing the country. The refugees from the GOP are going to go to the Democrats, and they will be welcomed with open arms because they will recognize their own. Capitalist henchmen will support other capitalist henchmen. The henchmen of billionaires will support each other. And I think that can only mean that the lefties, the genuine lefties, will eventually say, well, if we're winning every single election as Democrats, why aren't we being starting our own party, and thus the split? So when that happens, I think it's going to probably start locally, and I think it would benefit people to focus on local races. But beyond all of that, for the immediate, it's to focus on America's hidden four-party system and just vote in primaries.
Out of fear. They're going to be voting out of self-defense.
For that reason. The primaries are our way. Oh, dignified. There we go. The primaries are our way to settle these issues while still agreeing on the larger issue of fighting for democracy in the general election. So yeah, get people as left as you can in the primaries. If we want to do even more work, we should insist that the DNC divvy up its money in a more just way, because right now the way the DNC gives out money is to support corporate candidates, and that's got to go.
There are a whole lot of people who vote for Democratic candidates who don't actually like them. They're voting for the lesser of two evils. They're voting for the one that would do the least harm. You actually hear it framed as harm reduction. And until that far right threat is gone, that's what people are going to do because they're not going to want to split that vote. So it's the Republican Party, the right-wing party in the United States, has to catch up to everybody else. They have to move left a little bit. They have to progress. They have to at least go back to George Bush Republicanism before the Democratic Party or a social democratic party can really start to move left.
So we agree we agree broadly, Mr. of the Fifth Column and I. I just don't think that conservatives moving left is going to take the form of Republicans admitting they were wrong, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think what is going to happen is, as I've stated, MAGA is going to keep being MAGA. The GOP, rather Republicans, were already dealing with the fact that they need to gerrymander to survive. They need to exist off of less votes than Democrats. Well, if you then divide them in half with the people who still want to live in a democracy, the people who have at least some understanding of how things work, and the people who aren't comfortable being outright Nazis, even if they are still supporting of policies that ultimately hurt minorities. When you divide that group up, it's impossible for them to win anything except for the reddest of the red districts. And they will, MAGA will keep snatching those up. There's only one place to go if you love, Klansmen. That's MAGA. And being a party of greed, they're not going to go away. There's going to still be grifters grifting. But the corporatists, the GOP, the folks that are corporate leaning in the Republicans, they are going to flock to the Democrats, and as I say, that's just going to result in Democrats becoming a little more right wing. They're already right wingers. Or it's already, rather, a right-leaning party. It's going to go a little bit more right, and that will take them straight back to Bush, as he says. That's where they will be. And so when that becomes the overall consensus in Democrats, we should be ready for the opposite reaction then, and saying, okay, well, this is such a big tent, like a cell that has swollen, it's time to myose. And by the way, that would be a very healthy thing. I would love to have political opposition that I don't outright hate. I would love to be back to political opposition where I'm like, I don't believe with your governing principles. I'm going to pitch something different. But if they win, I'm not like the country is going to boil now. Instead, just be like, well, we're going to have a couple years where things aren't run as well, rather than don't work at all.
I would suggest that a group of determined people who are going to launch a social democracy-based party wouldn't really even need to start their own party. If they got active at the local levels and they built the power structure within the Democratic Party,
my man,
they could actually shift it over that much because it's not a huge jump. Because again, you're not crossing into actual leftist territory yet. I think that could be done, and it would probably be easier than trying to build the infrastructure and fight all of the money that the Democratic Party already has, because then you'd be fighting them both. And during the construction of that Social Democrat Party, you're going to be helping the Conservative Party because you're going to be pulling votes from them unless you can focus on getting out the vote and bringing young people who don't vote because they don't want to vote for the lesser of two evils. They want somebody to actually support. If a social democracy party focused on getting those voters out, and there's a lot of them, they might be able to do it that way. There's just a lot of hurdles for a a left-wing party in the United States, and a whole lot of it has to do with propaganda from the Cold War, there not being a historical tradition of having a party like that. And also, I mean, keep in mind that a lot of Americans, I mean, they think the Democratic Party is a left. So, I mean, they view it as a leftist party, even though it's not by any definition. And it doesn't help because commentators like to conflate the two.
So if you've heard me complain about Fox News, let me just tell you something, and it's going to hurt to hear a little bit. It certainly hurt me to come to this realization. Most media does what Fox News does for Nazis, except they do it for rich people. Most corporate media, as in it plays on television, as in you have to be able to purchase a broadcasting tower in order to play it, and you have to be able to run that expensive broadcasting tower in order to play it. Most of them are owned and operated by rich people. The people behind the desk are rich. The people who cut their significantly sized paychecks are rich. And they hang out with other rich people, and they get other rich people's opinions, and they don't, most important. And if, they don't hang out with people who are suffering. If there's someone in their life that's suffering, I'm going to do a clip with Ari Melber later. Let's take Ari Melber, because I like that guy. Don't get me wrong. But if Ari Melber has somebody in his life who's suffering, if his brother, for example, loses his job, Ari Melber can sit down, write out a check for $50,000, give it to his brother and say, pay me back whenever or don't, and move on with his life, because he's got millions of dollars. That means he never watches his brother. I don't even know if the guy has a brother, but his hypothetical brother. He never watches him skip a doctor's appointment, not take his kids to a doctor's appointment. He never watches his brother sell one car to pay for the repairs on the other car, because the other car overall breaks down less. He never watches his brother sell blood at $60 a pop, sell plasma to a company so that he can keep the lights on. He never sees that happening. And so there is less urgency around economics in everything he does, because he took one $50,000 hit that he didn't even have to check his bank account for. I wonder if the money would be there. That's what we're dealing with. So when somebody, doesn't go online to get some perspective, which is unfortunately the average American over a certain age anyway. When that happens, they end up thinking, as Bo is saying here, yeah, Democrats are left-wingers. Democrats are they're fighting for the social justice and all that. This is what it looks like when you have a left-wing party. No. It's just a different kind of right wing. It's admittedly less right-leaning than the Republicans, but you're getting Fox Newsed by MSNBC, NBC, CNN, ABC. All of these companies are Fox Newsing you, except they're doing it about corporations. And it sucks to hear, I know. But them's the breaks. The fact of it. They're going to have a hell of a time talking about the inequities of healthcare in America when these drug providers, when these hospitals are advertising on their channels, are they're dependent upon them for their income. Ari Melber's ability to protect his hypothetical brother with a $50,000 check goes away if enough advertisers pull out because they don't like what he's saying. That's the problem. Okay, what can you do? There's a little bit more from Bo. You know I love me some Bo. But he is worthy of a full watch without my mug interrupting him. I've got the link in the description. I recommend you checking him out. Let's go to the What You Can Do. Ooh, poorly done, Jake. Hey, there we are. So, this one, fortunately, is pretty straightforward. You vote in primaries. We don't have a left-wing party in the United States. We require one, desperately. We have essentially burned through our savings as a country. All the right-wing nonsense that we could afford, that we put up with during the Cold War for the sake of beating the Ruskies, which admittedly was an important thing to get done. But that's gone. We have on just about every way you can measure it. The timer on global warming, being able to do anything about it. The loss of generational wealth, the shrinking of the middle class, it's all gone too far to the point where we cannot afford to keep going the way we have. We require a left-wing party. How do we get that? Right now, the strategy is clear. Vote in primaries. Vote like crazy in primaries. Link in the description for Ballotopedia. That will tell you, the page on Ballotopedia, that will tell you when the primary vote day is coming up in your state. We got a while yet. We have a while. But pay attention to which candidates are out there. When you see somebody in your area that you really like, advocate the DNC to fund them. Say, I'm passionate about this person. I want to see you giving a chunk of the money that you have to them. Advocate for them. Most importantly, pay attention to when the primaries are so that you can cast your vote and get some actual left representation. All right, just popping in to have a look at some of these comments here. Laura says, I'm number 4. Hi, Bo. Hello, Laura. And, I didn't do the hi, Bo. Even though he did the howdy there, internet people. Darn it, I'll get it next time. Delighted to see that we're at 6 likes. Remember, if we get to 10, folks, we are going to play the True North Eager Beaver podcast interview. Those guys are delightful to talk to. I hope we get there. I want to play it. Max Idle says, hey, all, they're a bunch of multimillionaires being paid to speak for billionaires. Yes, they don't have skin in the same games we do. Yes, Max Idle. That is 100% correct. That is it. Hitting the nail on the head there. Well done. Laura says, MSNBC buries people who don't toe their line early on weekend mornings. True, and you've just reminded me that I'm going to have to watch them early weekend mornings. We are now 3, just 3 likes away from being able to play that interview and not make me a liar. So I'm delighted by it. Speaking of MSNBC and Ari, I would love to show you here. Whoopsie daisy. There we are. I would love to show you this from Ari Melber. He talks about indictments coming in the Georgia case with Donald Trump, and it's likely going to be something that Trump will hate. Ooh, I can't wait. Let's hear it.
The president said something to the effect of, I'm the effing president, take me up to the Capitol now. The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel. Mr. Trump then used his free hand to lunge towards Bobby Engel.
One of the dramatic moments from those hearings. We're now joined by the top staff investigator for the January 6th committee, now that it's completed its work, Timothy Hafey. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Ari.
You weren't doing a lot of interviews during your time on the committee.
I did a lot of interviews. We all did. We kind of collectively did them.
But I mean, you weren't speaking in public.
I was not doing any of these interviews. I was doing interviews.
But those interviews, I guess it's all interviews, right? Well, I consider those more, even more formal because you have the fact that people aren't supposed to lie to you under oath.
Exactly.
Just going to compliment both these gentlemen real quick on their tie game. Tip top.
Let's start with what we just looked at, the timeline. The DOJ looks late. Some of these subpoenas are hitting witnesses only after they put in a special counsel. Yeah. Why did it take your committee's work to get the Garland DOJ to act, and are you still concerned that they're slow?
I bust his chops a lot. I did in the last segment a little bit. But that's a good question. Why indeed were they ahead of Garland? Let's find out.
I think they were ahead of us on rioters, on what we'll call sort of the blue-collar part of this.
We talked about this yesterday. Yeah, they focused on the little guys.
People that were storming the Capitol, the seditious conspiracy, the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys. We were ahead of them, I think, on the white-collar part of this, the election fraud, the broader pattern that our report sketches out that the president and his co-conspirators put forth to disrupt.
Let me get right into you with that. Is that an evidentiary matter? You found more evidence and went up the line? Or is that a bias matter, that the DOJ had people who didn't really want to deal with DOJ officials, government officials, John Eastman, lawyers?
Ari Melber, my man, well done.
I don't know. That's a good question. Certainly, we were ahead of them when it came to developing some evidence. You're exactly right that they were reaching out to some people after they had already spoken to the committee. And I think because our work was so much under scrutiny and there was a lot of reporting about the people to whom we were speaking, they were eventually trying to catch up with us.
You don't know which it was, you said.
I don't know what their motivation was, whether it was resources, whether it was the desire to avoid politics. I can't speculate.
Is it more important to do the low end or the high people?
Well, they're different, right? The rioters on the ground, there were hundreds of them, and their cases have largely reflected that. Now, who set them in motion and the broader plan?
Look, he just asked which one's more important. Let me ask you this. Who's more likely to cause a second riot? Is it the rioters or the people that called them there? Who's more likely to make this happen again? The number one reason we enforce the law at all, the number one reason you issue a punishment when somebody breaks the law is to stop the thing, the harm, from continuing. That is the number one reason. So who's more important? There's your answer. Whoever is more likely to cause this thing to happen again. The rioters are not more likely to cause this to happen again. They don't have a platform with millions and millions of people listening. And as we saw time and time again, even though the J6 committee was focusing on the other end more than the rioters themselves, we saw they were there because they were told to be there. The DOJ avoided its responsibility, and I wasn't saying that last year, even though I was thinking it, because I was trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. I was trying to assume that they had some sort of plan, but no. We saw their hope appears to have been that we would be satisfied with henchmen going to jail, and a watered down investigation, probably resulting in an official finger wagging in the form of a dumb letter for everybody else.
Is a fundamentally different inquiry. And the people who are down at the Capitol don't necessarily have any sense about who's orchestrating. So I think they're really on parallel tracks. And I think the department now is vigorously pursuing both.
Those people who were there, who stormed the Capitol, without John Eastman, Rudy Giuliani, Donald Trump, would they ever have gotten there?
Absolutely not. Look, they were the last step in a multi-part plan to disrupt the joint session, right? The mob.
Absolutely not, he says. I just want to grind this point in because it's so important. He says absolutely not, and he's absolutely right. They were there because they were called there by the president. That son of a gun needs to be in jail. Bitch, that's the word I was looking for.
Was launched only after there was an attempt to use the Department of Justice for improper means to pressure state legislatures, to pressure the vice president. It was only when those prior planks of the plan were unsuccessful that the final step was to launch this mob, incite this mob to disrupt the session.
Right. You're laying out a timeline, and the evidence you laid out with your colleagues really did show people that it was actually worse than it looked when you woke up on the 7th, which is really saying something.
Yeah.
There are many ways to look at this or count it. I'm going to show ours, but you're so close to it, you may have further thoughts. So this is some of the arrows that we put together, as you said, over time. There were things that were perfectly legal. You can file frivolous lawsuits at the top.
That is an excellent graph. Look, your old pal Jake's a fan of a good news presentation. In fact, I'm going to get my mug off here. But look at that. Let's just walk through what they're showing, because I doubt very much they're going to take the time on air to explain it. The green represents legality. The red represents illegality. And then you, of course, left to right have the timeline. The lawsuits were perfectly legal the whole way through. Nothing illegal about doing those suits. Ridiculous, yes. Unethical, yeah, because they were based upon a lie. They couldn't hope to win, and if they had won, it would have been unethical. But they were legal. The electors, perfectly legal up until December of 2020. Why is that? Well, you can arrange for your electors ahead of time if you win, the people that will be there if you win, but once you know you haven't won, those electors are just folks. They're just people. They are absolutely not electors. To call them that after December of 2020, God help us. In fact, I realize it's a sliding scale there, but I would say earlier than that, after mid-November, when it was crystal clear. Oh, I see what they're doing. Okay, so after the lawsuits end, keeping the electors becomes illegal. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, that makes sense. States overturning votes started being legally questionable, darn near illegal, and after December of 2020 was just flat out illegal. And everything below that point that began in December of 2020, all of that, wildly illegal and must be punished in a court of law.
Right? States overturning votes, there's definitely, as you know, an argument on the front end, depending on how you do it, that it's not a crime. As you go down the line into December, you have Congress, Pence, the DOJ interference we just mentioned, the military plot that was stopped, and at the end, the sabotage plan coming out of that. So we counted these up. I'd love for you to just, while we leave this on the screen, walk us through what you see here, what you would add or change.
Yeah, look, that is exactly right. They started to exercise their right, as every campaign has, to challenge results, both process and results in court. Those efforts universally failed. After or as those court cases weren't working out, they started looking for other means. Let's launch the Department of Justice on investigations. Well, they did that and they didn't find anything, so there was an attempt to change the leadership at the department. Now let's go to the state legislators and state secretaries of state, and let's try to get fake elector certificates generated. Again, not very successful. Republican secretaries of state, legislators said no. Let's finally pressure our own vice president, our most loyal vice president. And he, too, said, I don't have the authority. And it is only
credit where it's due. They are explaining it. Good on them.
Only after those methodical attempts fail that the last straw is January 6th, a speech full of incitement and an angry mob, knowing that those folks were armed and agitated, launched down Pennsylvania Avenue toward the Capitol.
It's about to be March. The DOJ doesn't have endless time to do this without landing into an active primary season, debate, presidential debates, etc. If no one is charged for any of those other arrows, as we put it, is that justice?
Look, we made clear conclusions in a very public criminal referral because our evidence showed there was evidence of intent to disrupt the joint session. There was conspiratorial conduct. There may have been seditious conspiracy and other serious crimes. Now, the Department of Justice has levers that we didn't have. They have the ability to push through some privilege assertion to get information that we weren't able to get. I think they're being really careful and really thorough.
That's one way to put it. Let me go back to what he said. They have levers that we don't have. They have power, is what he means, that the J6 committee didn't have. They are using the excuse, and the they here being powerful people currently running our government, Democrat and Republican. They are using the excuse that you must be careful, that you mustn't violate the rights of yada, 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 in order to drag their feet. If it turns out after this that behind the scenes, and I'm sure they're going to pitch something to try to appear to be this, but if it turns out that behind the scenes they were working really hard, and they were, I'm sure that there's somebody spinning their wheels somewhere, but if it turns out there was one thing that was holding it up, one key piece of evidence, my counter to that would be, why was everything dependent on that one thing? If they're saying there was a few things, a few key pieces of evidence, my counter to that would be, why were just those things necessary in order to get one conviction, in order to get this started? Because there is no rule that says we have to do this all at once. If multiple crimes were committed, you can go one at a time. We saw in public crimes that are worthy of conviction, certainly indictment, but with just what we know happened already, what we, the people, are aware of happened already, there's enough to indict, and in my opinion, enough to convict. So why the hell haven't we gotten one yet? Motivation wasn't there. Public pressure has been the only thing that's gotten anything done. And credit to that man. The most public pressure came from the J6 committee, because they showed America, A, how quickly an investigation can be put together and executed and presented when you care, when you want to do that. Keep up the pressure. Link in the description. DOJ contact link. Tell them where the hell are the charges. Get this thing started.
If you're going to bring a case of this magnitude, you want to talk with absolutely everyone, push through every possible privilege.
Do you have the sense they're going to bring any of those cases?
Look, the evidence is there of the violation of federal crimes. And absent something inconsistent, which I don't expect, then I do think there will be indictments. I think there will be indictments in Georgia. I think there'll be indictments in Washington.
You do? You expect further indictments in Georgia?
It seems clear. Again, I'm basing this on the facts that we found. There is strong evidence of a number of people committing both crimes in Georgia and federal crimes. And I take the Attorney General at his word when he says he's going to call it on the merits.
Super interesting hearing that from you. I always like to keep my viewers in the loop here. You are one of the less famous, more informed investigators here. I think that's fair to say, because you weren't on camera, you were doing the work, but you were in this leading the committee's investigation. Let's look at the Trump criminal referral.
Little media literacy. One of the few times I can rely on my old career. I've said this when it comes to interviews. I've said if you see somebody getting interviewed on a major network like this, and they have a terrible webcam, and their audio sounds awful, and all of that, means it's going to be a good interview. It means they are there for their expertise. It means they are someone you should be excited to hear from. Similarly, this fella up there being less famous is good because he's there on Ari because of his expertise. You love to see it, and keep your eyes open for that. There should be a sort of fame from anonymity that people have. If you see a stranger on one of these networks, if they don't have a title that sounds fancy, that's going to be an interview worth listening to.
Points that you guys raised: obstruction, conspiracy, false statements, assistant insurrection, according to the committee. I'm curious about this process. It seems like in the beginning, middle of the committee, you weren't going towards referring Trump. The last hearing landed on this subpoena, which had people kind of scratching their heads. And then in that later period, and Liz Cheney lost her seat, you land on the referral. When did it become clear that you were going to make a criminal referral of Trump?
Well, look, I got to be careful that I can't disclose any internal committee deliberations, but the decision about a criminal referral was one that was obvious from the facts that we developed and pretty early in our process.
You feel early that was what the facts supported?
There was evidence of specific intent to disrupt the joint session. The elements of the statute: does someone corruptly obstruct, impede, or influence an official proceeding? So again, corruptly means it has to be specifically intended. And as evidence emerged that this was a multi-part plan, that was not just what happened on January 6th, but all of the events before, the president's strong desire to go to the Capitol, his inaction during the riot, as those things emerged, strong evidence of his intent to obstruct, impede, or influence the joint session. That emerged relatively early.
In your New York Times interview, you touched on the fact that we call these hearings, but you were making factual presentations.
Right.
So many congressional hearings don't work well because they don't do that.
Right.
Is this a model, do you think, that could work? Or was this also special because basically it was a hearing that had a range of views and parties, but it didn't have anyone actively sabotaging it?
Yeah, look, whether it's a model or not, I don't know. But our goal was to start to tell parts of the story along the way, right? Look, the gold standard when I started this was the 9/11 Commission report. A bound volume, really compelling. America is different now than it was 20 years ago, right? People are used to getting information more visually, in shorter bursts. And my clients, the members of the committee, saw that and decided, hey, we need to start telling the story in a different way, visually, earlier, in chunks, so that it will have maximum impact.
What can you do? What should you do? What can you do? You can contact the DOJ, tell them to keep the pressure up. What should you do? Well, I recommend that. I hear a lot of folks saying, temper your expectations. Let me ask you this. What is the harm on the DOJ being made aware of America's impatience for justice? What's the harm? Are they really going to prematurely launch a case? Do you think so? I don't. What happens if they do? Let's just go with that. Let's run with that. What happens if they do prematurely launch a case and they fail in court? Well, by the time one of those ends, the yolk of the egg will be pierced already. And we will have dozens of other cases. There are 56 crimes that Trump appears to have committed in office, or rather since 2015. The goal here is to put these mother effers in prison that broke the law. We need to pierce the yolk of that egg. Somebody, God help us. And right now, the horse leading this race is Fawny Willis in Georgia. God bless her. But somebody has got to have the balls to actually indict this son of a bitch. 45 has got to face a trial. He's got to be made to testify. We need to get this going. Way too long has passed. It is dangerous. I will also encourage you, if you are in one of the 5 states that does not yet have an investigation going into the fake electors that can start a state-level investigation, pressure your state's attorney general. Link in the description with the list of that. Pressure your state's attorney general to get it going. We've got Georgia. We've got Michigan. And I got great news for you, folks. It looks like we might have Arizona as well. Chris Mays, and we're going to do a whole segment on this at a future show, but Chris Mays, the AG in Arizona, Hachi Machi, looks like she's going to do it as well. But we don't have we only have her word so far. We don't have action. So pressure her anyway. By the way, she, like my state's attorney general, listed public pressure as one of the reasons she is starting up this case. She said her constituents have told her too long has passed. We don't feel that we are being protected by Merrick Garland. We want you, Chris Mays, to protect us. Do your job, Attorney General. Do your job. And so she has. It works, folks. Do not sleep on this. Do not let them think that you're sleeping on this. Make your voice heard if you are from one of the 5 fake elector states, including Arizona, until we find out that indeed she has confirmed she really did open a state-level investigation and isn't just talking about it. Yeah, put the pressure on. Can't wait to add the 3rd green check mark to that list. Ooh, boy. I do want to also add that contacting the Department of Justice in general doesn't hurt. Just be another voice telling Merrick Garland, get your ass off the couch. Let's be realistic. Get your ass off your politician friend's yacht and go levy some damn charges. I know, Jack Smith, he's a special counsel. He's at some point got to hand in a report to Merrick Garland, who makes the ultimate decision. Let him know what you're expecting to hear, that they are supposed to be pursuing a case against these people. This is for editing purposes. Well, let's look at this. Oh, look at that. Folks, we hit it. We are 100% now. In fact, let's do it next. We're going to do the interview with the Eager Beaver podcast. I do want to read the comments. Laura says, like Hitler going to jail, then coming back and overthrowing the German government on the second try. Yeah, if we don't take action, that's exactly what we're going to have. The GOP already has the electoral advantage of not needing the popular vote. They already have the electoral advantage of not needing the popular vote on the state level because of gerrymandering. They already have all kinds of electoral advantages, but they will also then get the fact that they are allowed to just try to overthrow the government every time they lose. It'll work eventually. Eventually, Mike Pence will bend whoever's in that role. Eventually, the military won't intervene because they'll say, why bother? It will happen if there's not consequence for it this time, if we don't set the standard. Well, speaking of the worst of the worst, let's go to that interview with the True North Eager Beaver podcast. I talked with them about a whole range of things, including who the worst politicians were in U.S. history, Canadian history, and in present-day U.S. and Canada. Let's have a listen. Worst politician currently in office. If you don't mind, I'll take the lead on this because I would like to try to pronounce this name for my choice. Okay. I don't want any spoilers. For Canada's worst politician currently in office, I have the leader of the minority party, and tell me if I've got this pronounced correctly. Is it asshole?
Yeah, you nailed it.
All right, excellent. I've heard
perfect pronunciation.
Pierre Poilievre. Yeah. Just he seems like a sharper version of Trump, essentially.
Yeah. A sharper version, but a wimpier version.
A little less racism too.
A little less, yeah.
A little less outward racism.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Much more dog whistle, like he speaks Anglo-Saxon.
He literally said that in a Jordan Peterson interview. I mean, to begin with, he's doing a Jordan Peterson show. He says, I speak in simple, plain Anglo-Saxon terms. Who says that?
Yeah.
Come on.
I famously order a coffee. I'm like, now you'll have to excuse me. I'm speaking Anglo-Saxon. Oh, Christ.
Right. Today I feel Polliver for 100 reasons. Polliver, yeah, definitely.
I'm going to go another route. It's the Premier of Saskatchewan, Scott Moe.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah. It's hard. I can't argue with that.
He is not a good person.
3 DUIs and one
He's
where
also
he
killed someone.
One where he killed a woman.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that'll do it.
But in Canada, we have this dynamic, right, where Alberta and Saskatchewan are sort of like the Texas and Alabama.
Yeah.
Texas and Mississippi.
Yeah.
And Alberta Alberta is the Texas.
With a little Floribama in there, though, at the same time. A little bit of that.
Yeah. So Scott Moe, Saskatchewan's a much smaller province. So basically everything that Alberta's been saying, Scott Moe's just basically been going like, me too.
He's a parrot.
But now that Alberta's had, their premier that they had before this one actually had a majority government and got booted out by his own caucus before his term was over. So now he's the elder statesman of the right, like this. So he's just, and he's
a terrible human being.
He's a terrible human being, and I know it's not fair because you shouldn't like make fun of the way people talk, but the way that he talks, he just literally sounds all the time like he's got a permanent concussion.
Well, and let's not overlook the fact that as much of a terrible human being he is, and we can give you a litany of horrible things he's done as both a politician and as a private citizen, and he boasted about some of these horrible things. He still is one of the reasons he got ousted was because you guys are starting to lose your shit. As terrible as he is, even he has standards. Yeah. And the current leader of the party, she just has corporate overlords and nothing else. Danielle Smith she's out of her mind. She doesn't even understand. What was her famous quote? Well, it's not like the federal government runs things.
Yeah, it's not like Ottawa's an actual federal government or national government or something.
What?
And then there was also about the unvaxxed by choice. She has never seen in her lifetime a group more discriminated against than the unvaxxed by choice.
Oh, God.
In her lifetime. Not gays, not black people, not the indigenous. She comes from in Canada, we're celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Delvin Vrind decision that made it such that you couldn't discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation. He lives in her backyard. He's from Alberta.
Yeah.
But she doesn't know of any group.
The unvaxxed were the most persecuted in history.
She's
Can we talk about residential schools for like 30 seconds?
Yeah.
Right. Come on, lady. Really?
Oh, my God. I believe Japanese, or rather Canadians of Japanese descent of a certain age will have some objections.
Would also have a word to say there.
We have that shared history. Our nations have that shared history.
We turned away some Jewish people in World War II as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
In Saskatchewan, there was a couple of factions of the KKK up there.
Oh, God!
It's like, listen, there's not a bad idea that no one won't copy. It doesn't market for everything, even the bad stuff.
Good Lord! So for your votes, who would you put as Canada's worst politician ever? And feel free to be petty or sophisticated, however you want to judge it.
Ooh.
Worst in history? There are a couple of pretty bad ones in the past, for sure. I don't think anybody's been quite the raging, gaping a-hole that this guy's been, no. I don't think there's anybody who's ever been quite like him in Canadian political history who has been such a hate-filled, vile spewing individual. I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah.
Mr.
Beaver, who you feel?
He's a bit much. Worst politician ever. That is so tough.
It is a tough.
The first one that comes, but it's so easy but it's not because he was a politician. He was just a sad, terrible human. That guy in Saskatchewan, Colin, whatever his last name was. Thatcher.
Oh yeah. Colin.
And he murdered his wife.
He murdered his wife.
Okay. Well,
I'm a pretty terrible person.
That's pretty bad. That's pretty bad. Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and cross out Rob Ford.
Yeah.
Change my
Well,
answer.
he was just a mayor, though. So right. So.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, but he's still a politician.
True. Yeah.
No, I think
and mayor of the biggest city in the country too.
Yeah, I would say the worst one is Stephen Harper, though, objectively. The number of times he's been overturned by the courts. I mean, he was overturned on trying to make a Supreme Court appointment. He broke the Constitution in trying to name a Supreme Court. He's the first leader found in contempt in the entire Commonwealth of his own parliament. He's had, the liberals talk all the time, the conservatives talk all the time about liberal corruption, but there's been not one police investigation into this government. They've had so many. They've had people charged. They've had people tried. They've
gone to jail,
guilty in courts to committing election fraud in their first ever election in terms of spending, and then they tried to keep the $1 million that they stole. And then we're forced to give that back too. They've had a cabinet minister go to jail.
Okay. Yeah.
He tried to ruin the census. That's another thing.
Yes.
That he did first. That you guys then tried to do in the site. He tried to screw up the census.
I gotta hold on to my one thing I can be angry about getting imported from Canada for that one. Oh, and boy, did the Republicans pick up the ball and sprint with it.
They ran with that one.
USA's worst politicians ever. I think we all know where that's gonna go. And currently in office for both of you. I'll just rip this Band-Aid off for me. Worst ever, Donald Trump, currently in office. Mitch McConnell, because I agree with you. I think he's one of the most skilled politicians ever in the United States. He just, works for the devil.
If only he used his powers for good.
Yeah.
Only.
I'm just gonna say real simple, ditto. Like ditto.
Okay, I'm gonna go a little different because yes, Trump is absolutely the worst, obviously, but I don't consider him a politician. He's literally a social parasite.
He's a game show host.
He basically performed a hostile corporate takeover. That's
a good way to put it. Great way to put it.
I mean, well, look at this. They had so many. What happened to him, right, is that because he was polling, there were so many people in there. I guess that he was polling 27% and 32%. People were saying, "Oh my God, he's in the lead," and it's like, that's 68% of the people who don't like you. And then he picks everybody off. And who does he save for last? He saves Kasich, who's like about as exciting as watching paint dry, and Ted Cruz, the only person hated more than him. It was just completely genius the way he took people out. I mean, the guy's, So, but he's a reality star parasite corporate takeover. He's not a politician. The worst politician ever is Reagan.
Oh yeah.
Reagan.
Yeah.
The 40 years of all that trickle down stuff and downloading corporate taxes onto the people that started with him took him forever. Right? We just went through COVID. Okay. I'm gay. I've had my pandemic. Thank you very much. 1980 and I watched it. Everything for us. I had all the feels, right down to the Republican president at the time who wouldn't say the word and do anything about it. Took him so long to say the word AIDS.
Okay.
So long to say it. He let people die because he didn't care, because the people that were dying were not him. And also did not allow people to be at their loved ones' bedsides.
Yeah, that alone. But the fact that he actually also caused a lot of those deaths by
the fairness doctrine too, and just you name it, he's terrible.
I gotta say,
News because of him.
I gotta say, it would be difficult to make me change my vote from Trump for worst ever. But if there was going to be somebody that would take that, it would be Reagan. And the case you made,
there's 4 decades of consequences that we've seen,
and
that's
just even
all him.
Just the Reaganomics, the fallout from that it just devastated, literally the middle class.
Completely, it wiped it out. Like you have to look at Eisenhower during his tenure, a Republican president who had the corporate tax rate was at 90% at the time.
Thank you. Yes. Would you please tell my countrymen this?
A Republican president, the supreme Allied commander, the guy who ran D-Day, had a 90% corporate tax rate. And he did that. He raised it because he says this is what we need to do to get our country back on track. It helped build up the middle class. It helped unions were strong, union jobs were strong, manufacturing. Well, we knew that was eventually going to go away anyway because people are allowed to be corporate greedy, and I can go on for hours on that stuff alone. But yeah, I think Eisenhower was at the last great Republican president.
Yep.
Great Republican president.
You've made a good point with Reagan. So.
And the way they sell it, right? They sell it and go in like, well, why is it fair that somebody who earns that much money and worked that hard to become a multimillionaire should have to pay that much money in tax? What happens if you become a multimillionaire? That's never going to fucking happen. It's never going to happen. You're not going to become a multimillionaire because the system is built to keep you down.
What that is 100% the catch-22 that I'm hoping I can get some GOP voters to understand. I mean, I just can't get enough of those fellas. They put on a wonderful show. If you are not a watcher of theirs, go check them out. They're on. They are the True North Eager Beaver podcast. They're on YouTube. They're on a number of podcasting platforms, as a matter of fact. But they do a daily live show on YouTube. The link will be in the description. If it's not already, I did kind of rush to get this up. Go check them out. Well, folks, I got great news regarding Ukraine, which is that people are getting sick of Russia being there. And when I say people, I don't just mean the people of Ukraine. I actually mean corporate media. Let me do a proper introduction here so I can chop this up a little more easily and get it to you faster. CNN recently talked with some experts regarding Ukraine. And the conclusion they came to is one I have been hoping to hear said on a national news network for a long time. The anniversary, 1 year of a war in Ukraine that need not be. It was done on Putin's whim. People died because Putin felt like it. Let's have a listen to what the experts are saying, which is that Russia has already lost.
Jake Sullivan, most wars, almost all wars, end in some kind of a negotiation. The sort of World War II war where one side completely annihilates the other is very, very rare in history. What will that end? What will those negotiations look like? The Chinese have put out this, I don't know what they call it, a peace plan. It's just out. It's a 12-point document detailing its position, calling for the end of hostilities and the resumption of peace talks. Is there anything to this? What is your reaction?
Well, my first reaction to it is that it could stop at point one, which is respect the sovereignty of all nations. That's the first point in the 12-point plan. This war could end tomorrow if Russia stopped attacking Ukraine and withdrew its forces. Ukraine wasn't attacking Russia. NATO wasn't attacking Russia. The United States wasn't attacking Russia.
I don't want to hear any peace plan that involves bowing down to an invader. Not one. That's not a peace plan. That's a capitulation plan. That is encouraging invaders to invade. And by the way, China cannot wait to get a world that is comfortable with a big, powerful nation invading a smaller one. They can't wait for it. Why? They can't wait to get into Taiwan. No, there's no peace plan that involves anything other than Russia get the fuck out of Ukraine is legitimate. Here's a peace plan. Russia, go home.
This was a war of choice by Putin waged upon Ukraine, and it could end if he simply left Ukraine. And that is the best way for this war to end.
Way to go, Jake Sullivan. Credit where it's due.
Now, I cannot predict the future. What I can tell you is that the United States is not going to dictate to Ukraine how this war ends. President Biden tells President Zelensky and our allies at every opportunity, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine.
That is a wonderful policy to have. Let's hope they stick to it.
It is the Ukrainians who will decide how they proceed towards the end to this war. Our job is to put them in the best possible position on the battlefield so they are in the best possible position to be able to do diplomacy whenever they choose to do diplomacy. And that is how we are going to proceed. But
Diplomacy should only take the form of, are we going to shoot at you, invaders, as you are retreating? Or will we allow you to crawl home? The only diplomacy to have. This idea that Ukraine should somehow be involved in peace talks, what would you be negotiating? Let me ask you this. We just did an interview with True North. What if Canada invaded the U.S.? What if it turns out they have had a massive military that we somehow didn't know about, and they just swarm? They take over Michigan, Wisconsin. They take over New York. At what point would the war end? We fight them just like Ukraine is fighting Russia. It goes to a standstill. We push them back, but they're still occupying those states. Would we say, all right, we need to be peaceful people here. Which of these states will we let them have? Can we let them have Wisconsin? No, that's ridiculous. The war would end, assuming we didn't counterattack over the border. The war would end when they went home. That should be the only discussion about when the war ends in Ukraine. Russia the hell out of all of Ukraine, including Crimea, which is just another region in Ukraine. There is no more, we're not allowing the annexing of countries in the 21st century. Please and thank you. That said, I do like that the Biden administration is essentially saying that by saying we will allow these people who are a free sovereign people to dictate what they will do. We are simply their allies. And we will help them in whatever they want to do. Excellent.
I think there's one more important point as we approach this anniversary, and as actually the anniversary has arrived in Ukraine, and that is Russia has already lost this war. Russia's aims in this war were to wipe Ukraine off the map, to take the capital and to eliminate Ukraine, to absorb it into Russia.
Like they are doing with Belarus, by the way. The current leader of Belarus was installed by Russia, and he is a pro-Russian simp. They are trying to, or rather, Putin is trying to make his name in history as anything other than the dictator that presided over a failing Russia by taking over countries, old school Soviet style. Yeah, they straight up tried to steal Ukraine from itself.
They failed at doing that, and they are in no position to be able to do that as we go forward.
Also, Russia was uncomfortable with the existence of NATO and the possibility that Ukraine might join it. Ukraine is virtually guaranteed to be in NATO at the conclusion of this war.
And it is important for everyone to remember that the courage and bravery of the Ukrainian people has already accomplished that objective, and the support of the United States and our allies and partners around the world.
I'm sorry, I just need to clarify. The reason they are not in NATO presently is there is a rule that NATO does not accept members who are currently involved in a war.
Has helped contribute to that. But where this goes from here is something that will play out over the coming months. What we know is day by day, we simply have to keep doing our job, which is to give the Ukrainians the tools they need to defend themselves.
Sam, whatever happens at the end of this war, Ukraine is going to need a massive amount of reconstruction and assistance. Does the world have the capacity? Does the United States have the capacity for the kind of thing? You know, people talk about a Marshall Plan like there was after 1945 to help Europe rebuild. Is that the kind of scale we need to be thinking about?
Well, I think we associate the Marshall Plan with a moment, right? Just as we associate the end of the war, World War II, with a moment. And it looks as though recovery and reconstruction in Ukraine, at least for the time being, is going to happen differently. Earlier this month, the World Bank announced $50 million to invest in the repair and restoration of the transport networks, the transport infrastructure in Ukraine. And that's how USAID is proceeding as we try to catalyze the involvement of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the big international financial institutions, and to get the private sector to be interested in coming back to those parts of Ukraine that are relatively peaceful, and even, to continue to make investments elsewhere. We just struck a public-private partnership with Bayer, which is building a new seed factory in Ukraine, which is going to employ thousands of Ukrainians. The more Ukrainians are employed, the more revenue there is, the less assistance will need to come from outside. So this is going to be from within and from without, but I think it's not necessarily going to be an on-off switch.
Her answer to how do we lessen this bill? If we're going to be allies with these people, which we are, and they are going to have a massive bill at the end of this war for all the damages done to rebuild their country. How are we going to lessen that bill? I am hearing the most neoliberal response I may have ever heard, which is, well, right now what we're doing is we're encouraging businesses to go into this war zone and invest, and that investment will mean that they'll have to, here's another way to do it, shorten the war. Shorten the damage done, because we are hitting Russia as hard as we possibly can. I got someone here who had a rather interesting take on that. And believe it or not, his name is Leon Panetta. Here he is on MSNBC.
And joining us now is Leon Panetta, former Defense Secretary, CIA Director, of course, former White House Chief of Staff. Leon, you've done it all, but today was a pretty strong day following up on a dramatic day yesterday. What would you say about the Biden White House in pulling this off so far?
Well, there's no question that the president has been on a historic trip at a very historic time. And the trip is, in my mind, a total affirmation of United States' world leadership at a very critical time. For the president to go to Ukraine, to take a very risky trip, and then to stand up, not only saying that Kyiv is still standing, but also in Poland, that this is about freedom and about democracy.
Nice to have the U.S. back as a leader a little bit in the war. In the world. It's nice. Only seems to happen when we have Democrat presidents. Funny how that works.
I think he really has made very clear what a pivotal time this is. This is not just about the war in Ukraine. It's about whether or not democracy is going to survive in the 21st century. And I think his ability to make that clear and to create this bond between our allies in Ukraine is extremely important in defining democracy versus autocracy.
How worrying is Putin's announcement, sharp contrast, of course, to the president's speech here, that Russia is getting out of the New START treaty? Is this only symbolic, given that they had already blocked inspections, so it couldn't be verified any longer?
It's certainly not a surprise. They were essentially moving in that direction, and it's pretty clear that they've now taken this last step, which only confirms in my mind that we're living at a very dangerous time, in which not only are we trying to defend democracy, but we're dealing with the threat from Putin, who continues to talk about the potential of using a nuclear weapon. And in addition, we're looking at the possibility that China might provide aid to Russia, which essentially means that the United States is going to be confronting really an axis of evil between China, Russia, and other autocracies like North Korea and Iran.
And of course, we are as we are returning to this Cold War mentality with Russia threatening nukes and proxy wars and all that, we're also undergoing the same thing at home. We're also fighting for the existence of democracy at home. And it is again a proxy war. This time, it is U.S. lefties versus the right wing, supported by Putin, with his web brigade and his oligarchs literally giving money to some of our politicians. George Santos is a prime example of that. He's in the spotlight more. It's easier to track where his money came from because there's more interest in him in general. Well, guess what? A Russian oligarch was one of them. Guess what some of the propaganda he was putting out while he was running was? Why we shouldn't be helping Ukraine. It's a proxy war. It continues.
This is a very definitive moment in which the United States and the rest of the world has to confront the threat from tyrants around the world as well.
How much of a game changer could it be if China does weigh in and ignore Tony Blinken's very strong warnings on a Saturday night meeting when we were all in Munich, and go ahead and cross that line and arm Russia for this war?
Well, I was very pleased with Secretary Blinken's warning to China. I think it was a very strong warning about the serious consequences of doing that. I find it difficult to believe that she really wants to get into the middle of this. China has usually been concerned about China first, and for them to engage in providing arms and getting in the middle of this war between NATO and the United States and Ukraine against Russia only will weaken China.
I want to pause there for a second because even though I don't agree with this, I just want to be realistic with you about what this means for the U.S. In theory, if China were dumb enough to commit to doing for Russia what we are doing for Ukraine, they would succeed only in benefiting the U.S. Why? Because it would drag the war on. And the longer the war goes on, this is going to be hard to hear, but the more the U.S. benefits on the world stage. Because Russia's getting bled to death. Russia can't be a problem for the U.S. elsewhere because they're too busy being a problem for Ukrainians right now. They're also bleeding resources they don't have. And guess what? If China were to do this for Russia, what we are doing for Ukraine, they would be doing it with a smaller pocketbook. They'd be dipping into resources they also don't really have. We have a hell of a lot of tanks, planes, Abrams, Bradleys, those infantry fighting vehicles. We have a hell of a lot of stuff just laying around. We also are the makers of a lot of this stuff. So if we have to replenish our stocks, we are essentially our stocks of weaponry. We are often essentially just buying from ourselves. We're not like Poland where we're buying our tanks from Germany. No. We are essentially buying from ourselves. So if China were to try to do this, what they would become is the new Russia, and U.S. war hawks would just say, okay, good. Let's bleed them too. Why not? The end result, and they, of course, their fuel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the end result would only benefit the U.S. I'm not saying that because I think we should push for that. No, the opposite. In fact, I think we should support Ukraine harder to boot Russia out faster, even though on the world stage, it's of less direct benefit to the United States. We should do that because it's the decent thing to do. Because it's not all about conquering our enemies. It is about not having people get shelled in their homes for no damn reason. And I was shocked that Leon frickin' Panetta, a former CIA guy, seems to have the same opinion. Here it is.
It'll only weaken China. So I would think that despite the threats and the tough talk, Xi has got to be thinking long and hard about the consequences that China will face if they, in fact, engage in providing weapons to Russia. It would be a pivotal step for China as well to suddenly get in the middle of this.
Wang Yi, the top diplomat, is in Moscow today, and there's a report in the Wall Street Journal, which we have not confirmed, that President Xi is going to make a trip to Moscow. So it just depends on whether the trip is accompanied by weapons. That would be the game changer. Let me ask you about President Zelensky's appeal for fighter jets, arguing that the F-16s, of course, the White House is arguing that the F-16s are too complicated, it takes too much pilot training, certainly would not be in place for this current offensive by Russia, which is misnamed the spring offensive. It's already underway. But do you think that those fighter jets should be supplied, or as Zelensky's arguing, or is the administration correct?
I think we're at a stage where, frankly, everything should be on the table and being considered. I mean, I recognize the issue of training, the issue of maintenance, et cetera, and all of that has to be taken into consideration. But we're in it for the long haul, and at this moment in time, it is very important that Ukraine maintain the initiative in this war. Russia's losing. Even though they're trying to put on an offensive, they're not gaining ground. And it's clear that Ukraine has the momentum. We've got to maintain that momentum. We've got to give them whatever they need in order to continue to win this war.
Leon Panetta, son of a gun. Well, that's not right. He is completely correct. He's correct. There is a map that shows the progress of the war in Ukraine, and you see Russia rush in, then get pushed back to the border, and then it wobbles. Fighter jets would make all the difference. Zelensky has been telling us this from the start. From the get-go, Zelensky has been saying this. Russian air superiority is the biggest issue here. On the ground, oh my God, Ukraine is wiping the floor with what the world used to think might have been the third strongest military. Wiping the floor with them. They've been smacking them around when Ukraine didn't have tanks and Russia did. There are carcasses of Russian tanks scattered throughout Ukraine. You got farmers hauling them away with their tractors. Let's end this damn thing. Let's eliminate that Russian air superiority. Give them a little taste of American air superiority. Let's put some of those death machines we have wasted trillions on to actual good use. I'm not saying swords into plowshares. I'm saying swords to the oppressed. Give them away. Why the hell not? And, by the way, talk about making an ally for all time. Any Ukrainian alive in this generation, if we give fighter jets to Ukraine, any Ukrainian alive in this generation will be a pal of the United States for the rest of their lives. That is a mixing of hard power and soft power that we should strongly be considering.
Maintain that momentum. We've got to give them whatever they need in order to continue to win this war. And so I'd put everything on the table. I would look at what are the most important weapons they need at this point in time and make sure that we're providing those weapons. But I would consider everything that could help Ukraine be able to defend itself. And for that reason, and I get this, frankly, from the administration itself, that, even though they may raise concerns, that the reality is that they are considering whatever may be necessary to try to help Ukraine in this war.
How important is it?
I love hearing that. I take it seriously from Panetta because he a bit of a war hawk himself. He was not well loved by lefties in his when he previously served the U.S. government, I believe under Obama. But man, to have this fella tell us that the current administration is seriously considering this is eye-opening. Alexander Vindman pushed for it on MSNBC as well. I sincerely hope that that's in the cards, and that, hell, I hope it happens.
You think that Zelensky not pushed too hard into Crimea, would that be a trigger against something horrendous from Vladimir Putin?
I think right now the most important thing is for Ukraine to be able to stop any Russian offensive and go on the initiative, be able to start pushing Russia back in the Donbass and push them out of the territories they gained as a result of this invasion. I think that ought to be the primary focus. Obviously, they continue to believe that Crimea is part of the Ukraine, and it is, and Russia obtained it illegally. But I think right now the main focus ought to be on pushing the Russians back, gaining the initiative, and making clear that Russia is not going to succeed. The most important thing to maintaining the unity of the United States and NATO and Ukraine is Ukraine showing that it's winning this war. That is what will hold everybody together in trying to make clear that Putin will not succeed. And that needs to be the focus of our military effort there.
Leon.
I'm delighted to see it. It is my hope that we have a free Ukraine by this point next year. I'll tell you this. We're going to do a hell of a live stream when the Ruskies are retreating in full. Well, what can you do? You can, of course, contact your representative and tell them that you want full support for Ukraine. It's the only decent thing to do, in my humble opinion. Make sure they know that Americans care. Americans are here, and Americans care. We're watching, and we are not okay with giving somebody half-assed help to defend themselves. Full support for Ukraine. Thank you so much for joining me today. This is, of course, WYCD Wicked. That stands for What You Can Do, and I want to give you a heads up. Of course, we're going to be releasing all the clips from today's show, but we're also doing Salty Saturday tomorrow, wherein my intention is to look at the crimes that Trump has committed in office and be salty about the fact that we haven't done anything about it. 56 for 45. We're looking at 56 crimes that did not get punished. At least haven't been so far. It's going to be fun. It's going to be petty. I hope you'll join us for that as well. This has been WYCD Wicked. That stands for What You Can Do. My name's Jake. Thank you for joining me today. And I will see you next time.
Yeah, do you even